And we are live with Joe Barresi. Consato students, this is for you guys. Joe has workshops coming up December. What were about the dates, Joe?
3, 4, 5, and 6, I believe.
Okay. ProSoundWorkshop.com.
Check it out.
Why do you do the workshops, Joe?
To be honest, when I first got into my own studio, I interviewed a bunch of people that wanted to assist for me, and it was so bad. The guys coming out of recording schools were just didn't really have the kind of knowledge that I thought they should have. So it seemed to me like instead of paying 20 grand to go to some recording workshop somewhere, come spend 2 days. And my partner and I, who was my assistant forever at A&M when I used to work down there, we started these workshops just to because it's really, it just comes down to this is what you really need to know. You know what I mean? And it's from guys that actually make records. So, and I do it in my own studio, so it's very easy to show people. He mostly works in the box. I work mostly out of the box. So it's kind of a good hybrid of two things. His name is Chad Bamford. He works for, he mixes for Guitar Center sessions, all those DirecTV Guitar Center things. And he actually took over on Weezer for me back in the day when I couldn't do it anymore. So we've made the same kind of rock records, and it's just kind of a good thing. We put a good curriculum together, and it's just 2-day workshops. There's enough information in 2 days to blow your mind, and then, then absorb it and then call me and say what the hell you're talking about, and I explain it again or whatever. And it's nice to just actually hear people get better recording and not just continuously get tracks that are not labeled or have pops and clicks all over them, or things that I think are very important. The art of engineering, trying to preserve the art of engineering.
I spent the last couple of days listening to Tool, Fu Manchu, SoundGarden, Slipknot, and Queens of the Stone Age. And one of the things that I got out of all that is
a headache.
See, I'm hip hop and I'm R&B, right? So right now I'm on this emotion thing, and what emotionally, what is music going to get out of me? A headache? No. What I got was it's like you just don't care what you guys are using. You're going to make somebody feel it. Like I actually heard or felt automation coming at me to where something caught my attention, and it was like an emotional thing. It was done to evoke something or do something to me, and it was. After doing that, I was listening to somebody's mix, and it was just static, and I was like, okay, this is boring as hell, because your stuff was coming out from everywhere, coming at me,
Yeah, man, it's weird because I listen to other people's mixes sometimes, and I just go, man, that is just perfect. How come I can't mix like that? I don't want to mix like that. You know what I mean? Like, to me, there is a difference in the left and the right. There's a difference in the hi-hat and the ride, and the dark and the light, and the front and the back, and all that kind of stuff. So I was just listening to a record I just mixed. I actually just texted Ross Robinson because he produced it, a band called Suicide Silence, and it's a very different record for these guys, and it's very well written. But I just texted him like, man, this is like rediscovering what I loved about music, because there's elements of just even one line that's got an effect on it that's emotional, and then just makes me think, oh man, it makes me really listen to what the vocals are saying, as opposed to, when everything's perfect, it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other, kind of like I'm talking right now in a super monotone voice. But if something jabs you, you remember it. So that's kind of like how I work. I don't know, maybe doesn't make you want to drive fast. What good is it anyway?
But as I listen, it's like one of the questions that I had was, okay, I'm picturing somebody sitting here playing a guitar, and what in my head you're saying to that person is what you really want is that performance out of them. You don't like. I know tone to you is really important, but that tone, that performance, that expression, that's what I was getting, because I didn't know what these sounds were supposed to sound like. I'm hip hop. And it was just making me feel a certain way, no matter what these sounds were.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the end, it could be any sound. You can always fix a sound if you had to, or augment it. But fixing a performance is it's unfortunately because I still have tape machines, so I still think of music or editing in those terms, big sections and feeling, and it's okay if something moves because you're gonna want to ebb and flow, you know. But for me, grid editing is just very boring. So I'd much rather have a good performance and an emotional performance. If it sounds terrible, you still connect with the performance, and you can always make the sound better. But a great sounding shitty performance doesn't really do anything.
What are you doing so that from group to group, you actually get the performances out of people? I mean, are you cussing them out, choking them?
Well, I do a lot of pre-pro first of all, so I'd like to make sure the songs are in a presentable state, but that doesn't mean they need to be 3 minutes long and, you know, radio ready. If there's a need for a solo to go 7 minutes, then just go 7 minutes. Why not? So I'd like to track live. I might not keep it, but that performance of people playing in the room together, you can't substitute that. So a lot of times it's the first time that a band has actually listened to themselves that well, because in a rehearsal room, you don't really hear very well. You kind of hear what's in front of your amp or a ride cymbal or a crash cymbal or whatever. But in the studio, we do a little pre-pro as well and track live. But when I'm mixing other people's stuff, the way you can get performance out of it is just to approach it as a fan, really. I mean, I think you need to make music. A lot of times what people will just dive in with the eyes and start fixing stuff or tuning or whatever. And a lot of times I find that something sounds out of tune. It might not sound out of tune once the guitars are around it and the bass is around it, and if something's a little off timing wise, it might make a fatter downbeat as opposed to me wanting to edit it all. So I let the music unfold itself first before it bugs me, and then maybe I'll fix something later.
Okay, Gavin, you had a question for him. Say hello and give it a shot. Go for it.
What it is, Joe. First off, I want to say thank you and that I'm a huge fan.
Awesome.
A particular project you worked on, like, is part of, like, I guess you say it's like a soundtrack to my life at one point. Because when I was in early 9th, 10th grade, I'm from a small town in Arkansas, and like now I do hip hop, but back then it was a huge punk rock scene. And my homeboy put me on to Pennywise. So the first rock album I ever bought was Pennywise Live at the Key Club. And then I bought not Victim of Reality, but Land of the Free.
Yeah.
I know you played a big part in that album. Like, it's like I've done a lot of research on you, but you never really talked about that particular album. Like, can you talk about how you got involved with Pennywise?
I had met Brett Gurwitz from Epitaph, and I think he hooked us up. And those guys lived in Hermosa, and I lived in Burbank at the time. So they actually had a really great studio down in Hermosa called Stall Number 2. And I had a Trident console and a little Neve sidecar, and it looked like a little rehearsal room, but it actually had a great sound. It just didn't take a bunch of money to make it sound good. It sounded cool. So that was one of those records. It was tough because I had to drive, it was only an hour to Hermosa, but sometimes in LA traffic, that could be 2 hours. So you leave at 10 a.m., you get there at noon, and by the time you get there, you're already frustrated. I tried to track it to tape. It was a different record for those guys because they weren't used to somebody coming down on them like that. I think they made great records before me, but that record had some really good songs, and I wanted to present it in the right way. And some of the key moments, it was just, me and Fletcher, basically. Fletcher is a great guitar player, and he really is the leader of that band. And he actually has great instinct, because he said Fuck Authority was going to be the first single, and I said, there's no way you're going to get Fuck Authority on the radio. And next thing I know, I hear Fuck Authority on the radio. So what do I know? But it was it was a constant struggle to make stuff sound better. And I was trying to find a way to bust stuff externally, because I didn't really like the way the Trident busting stuff together. So I had this little box that Brent Averill built. It had basically 2 XLR inputs and 1 XLR output. So I could take 2 microphones on a cabinet, run it into 2 mic pre's, and the output of the 2 mic pre's fed this box, and then I would bust it down to 1. It wasn't the greatest sounding thing in the world, but the fact that I was trying to commit because I was still going to tape at the time. And it was just a cool record. I mixed it on an SSL at a place that's no longer there. But there was a lot of, Byron the drummer was sponsored by Red Bull. So we had a Red Bull drum kit. So there's quite a lot of energy going on in the room. A lot of Red Bulls, but I really don't know what else. I mean, Fletcher's he's got a signature guitar sound as well. And he wasn't used to having somebody make him tune or play stuff a million times. I wasn't really into punching and fixing. I was just like, let's play it, and then let's maybe punch a few spots. So he told me at one point he was going to tattoo my name on his wrist. So every time he'd look down when he was playing, he could see my name and remind him to tune up because I told him to tune so many times. But it was fun. It was a tough record to make, but it was fun at the same time. We've actually been talking about maybe doing it again, so let's see.
And then my last question is, I know me personally in rock, I feel like there's different like subgenres. So it's like for you to work with Tool, Weezer, then work with Limp Bizkit, and then work with Pennywise, is your approach different with those different bands since they got rock? Some got more deeper rock elements than others. Like, is there a different approach when you come to each band, or do you have the same approach?
Well, I mean, like in the case of Tool, I sat in a rehearsal room for a month, and I really kind of tried to focus on what their sound was and when stuff felt good. And also I tried to figure out what they wanted to achieve making a record with me as opposed to the previous person. So Limp Bizkit was really just a vocal session, only Fred didn't show up for 3 days. So it was the Neptunes and I and DJ Lethal in a room, and they were trying to make some beats, and instead of doing the same way, I brought in some guitar pedals, and we started putting turntables through guitar pedals, and that re-inspired some of those things. So it really is a matter of maybe just bringing a different element into the room to get you inspired or creative. But in general, I'm just trying to make your record, maybe just give it a little bit of my injection.
Okay, well, like I said, thank you, and I appreciate you for answering those questions.
I'm actually working on a band from Arkansas right now. It's a band called Pallbearer.
Oh, okay. That's what's up.
Check it out.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, and Pennywise, they're on tour right now. They're going to be in New Orleans here soon, so I'm definitely going to that.
Awesome. I'll tell you one thing about Fletcher, too, that's pretty great. Like, kids would come from all over the country to come see Pennywise, and he would always pay to have them go get a tattoo, a Pennywise tattoo, if they wanted one.
I would definitely, man, it was already on my bucket list. I would definitely get a Pennywise tattoo.
Well, if you meet Fletcher, if I could hook it up, you'd probably pay for it if you go to his tattoo guy. So when you're out here, he might try to do it himself. You don't want him to do it.
Nah, I'm cool. Okay.
Hey, Joe, Jesse, Key Largo, longtime fan. Hey, I've got a couple of workflow questions and then a little follow-up. So are you still tracking basics to tape?
How I'm doing it is I run the tape machine in tandem with the Pro Tools rig, but I'm not just letting it run free. I'm actually locking it to the Pro Tools rig. So it's
sync, because I run a JH24, and what I'm doing is I'm recording to the HD, simultaneously not synced to the JH24. I guess my question is when you load the tape back into Pro Tools, are you just loading the one take you think you're going to use?
No. What I do is I have 6 reels of tape that I'm using, 1 hour through 6 hours stripe time code, and I'll lock the tape machine to the Pro Tools rig, so it's always synchronized. The case where it's running free is obviously your tape machine performance is going to be different than your digital performance because your tape machine is going to move. So because it's locked, it's exactly the same performance. So I'll do 3 takes on a reel and locked on input. So in case the tape machine dies or something happens to the tape, I still have the performance in the digital domain. So basically the output of the tape machine feeds the input of the Pro Tools rig. And then I'll figure out maybe take 2 sucks, let's go do another take. And then I'll dump all 3 in repro over. So I have both the digital takes and the analog repro takes. And then I'll cut the edits between the analog stuff in Pro Tools. I don't cut the tape anymore. I'm still
right. when you load the tape into Pro Tools, are you loading them in as new tracks or playlists?
I'm usually doing a playlist, so I'll take, for instance, if I do 3 takes of a song, it'll be take 1, take 2, and take 3 in the Pro Tools playlist, and then I'll do tape 1, tape 2, and tape 3 when I dump those in. Then I'll line them all up so I can freely cut between the tape ones. So I can grab fills and stuff, and that's the important part of having it locked and video reffed, is because it's exactly the same. If you, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the way you're doing it, but if you run it free and you run at the same time into digital, your tape machine is going to definitely move. So your song might be shorter or longer depending on your AC, your current, you know, your.
How are you locking the tape deck?
So basically, you need SMPTE on one track, and then you have a sync IO box on your Pro Tools rig. And I'm using a pair of Lynx synchronizers and running it as.
That's what I have. I have the Lynx. I haven't quite.
So you want to feed SMPTE out of your sync IO into one Lynx, and then your tape machine is synchronized to the second Lynx, and it's a code-only master. So when you hit play on your tape machine, your tape machine is the master, basically, and that's very important because it's more forgiving for the analog to move as opposed to the digital to move. When the digital starts fluctuating, then sample rates are changing. But when the digital is locked, and you should print your time code on your tape and video ref everything. You can buy a little black burst generator for $49 and make sure everything's video refed. And it's the lock is so tight it doesn't even flange. It's that tight. It's exact when you do it.
Okay. I have 2 Lynx. I haven't broken them out. All right, and then follow up on that is when you're tracking to tape, how is it that you encourage the bass player and the first guitarist to really play the song, and not just go, oh well, I know I'm going to redo it later.
I mean, you know, I set everybody up live, so even though I'm not cranking half stacks live, I'm running their amp. So it's still their guitar amp, but I'm using a speaker simulator, whether it's a Palmer or Mesa Cab Clone, Rivera, the Rivera Rock Crusher, any of the speaker simulators. So it's still an amp sound, and I have the guys in the room playing together. So it's still the visual thing going on, and then, you know, it's good old fashioned motivation, man. I mean, a lot of times you get some cool stuff. It might not be the greatest guitar sound, the greatest bass sound, but the performance is there, and you can always reamp the bass DI, and you can always use some of that guitar stuff anyway. Okay.
And then my follow-up, I guess, is on productions. I mean, across your career, I've found that a lot of the arrangements of the songs have a strong leaning towards an atmospheric intro. I mean, a vast number of them, and I was wondering, it's like sort of like the setup. Is that your production, or is that normally the arrangement of the band? Are they coming in with those intros? I was just curious.
Sometimes it's a little of both, but I mean, a lot of times it's the same thing. Like I'm saying, when you're tracking live, sometimes things happen. Like in the case of Chevelle, when those 3 guys are playing in the room together, and then maybe somebody's playing a little riff, or in between takes, or while you're rewinding the tape or whatever, or somebody's grabbing a drink, and there might be a little drum beat that happens, and all of a sudden you're like, hang on a second, push up a few room mics, and then the next thing you know what I mean? The things happen like that. I have instruments everywhere when I'm recording in my studio, because you could get inspired. I mean, I've had somebody hit the lamp with a drumstick, and it had a cool sound, and it almost sounded like a bell. So, and then you just kind of, it's never on purpose unless it was written in the song, but you know, just being aware of things that happen.
A lot of them. I spent a great deal of time listening last night. I mean, there's a vast amount of them that have this atmospheric sort of setup before the punch in the face, as it were.
Well, sometimes it's good, I guess. It's never really a conscientious thing for me. I never really thought about it. It just, you know, sometimes the song is written like that, and sometimes it's just a matter of you get inspiration in weird moments, and now your song has a new intro.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Of course.
You have a great day.
Thank you, too.
Your turn, Mark.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for doing this. Very cool. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
You made some records that are some of my favorite, you know, and inspirational, and being an engineer and all that stuff. So thanks again for doing this.
Well,
So question, like, one of the things that I think is really, really neat about your sort of approach to engineering and everything is how many experimental things that you do. For just a quick example, like doing the little speaker in the control room to get feedback from guitar players while they're tracking, little things like that have sort of like put a renewed interest in engineering for me. I was kind of wondering if you devote any of your day to trying to find new stuff or experiment, like decide to go find new things.
It is my day off, and I've already soldered a speaker that I'm gonna try. You know what I mean? Like every day that I'm not off and doing other stuff is where you learn your craft, man. I've had a guy over here with like 18 bass DIs. My friend's a bass player, and I'm like, let's try out 18 bass DIs today with an active and a passive bass. So that's how you learn stuff. I'll reamp, you know, let's do ribbon mics. Okay, call up all your friends, bring all your ribbon mics over, and now let's sit around and scientifically measure the distance from a speaker to a microphone and record the same performance over and over. And to me, that's just kind of fun stuff. And not that it always applies to everything, because every situation changes, but it's you know, learning. It's fun for me to grab a guitar pedal and start running everything through it to see what it does, you know. So, and then a lot of times you do it while you're recording as well, but it depends on, you know, the flow. You don't want to disrupt the flow. Somebody wanting to make music and then say, hang on a second, I've got 18 guitar pedals you should try out. You kind of maybe have them set up ready to go, and then you start playing with things.
Awesome. Yeah. So obviously another thing about your productions and everything are the enormous size of the drums. I had a question specifically related to overheads, because your cymbals always seem so perfectly controlled and kind of balanced in there. And I was sort of wondering if you approach overheads from a spot miking standpoint of the cymbals, or if you're doing like whole picture, like what's...
I'm not a whole picture person. If there's, like in the case of Tool, there was so many cymbals that I approach it as 3 overheads. So basically a left side, a right side, and a center. And then anything that it didn't pick up, I would spot mic, like a crash or a splash or a china or whatever. But for me, it's usually a cymbal mic. I have a ride mic and a hat mic always. So that's my definition. And then there's usually a pair of overheads left and right. But if there's 2 crashes and 3 crashes, then maybe I might spot mic 1, or, you know, it depends. It depends on how much the person plays it as well. So, but it's more spotty, but it's definitely not like Slipknot spot mic where every single crash means something and you need microphones and everything. It's in that case, yes. And a lot of times I'll get small diaphragm condenser mics and go deep. Spend a lot of time getting the sound of the microphone and the cymbal and the phase and the relationship. But normally I'm using Violet Amethyst Vintage too. That's my favorite go-to microphone. They're kind of a little hard to find right now. But I'll switch overheads out on a song too. If I'm looking for a fatter snare or a slower song with a thicker kind of sound, I'll go like a Mojave, the tube mic, the 200, I think it's called, or maybe it's an MA100. I don't remember the number. So it always changes for me.
Wow, very cool. Do you have any kind of rules that you go with? You know, are you a tape measure kind of guy, or?
No, that's the most ridiculous shit I've ever heard in my life. I mean, there's no 2 mics that are same, 2 mic cables, 2 mic pre's, 2 lengths of cable. It just, you know, there's an article on this guy named Mike Flicker, who's a great engineer, did a bunch of Heart records, and he did, you know, all the early Barracuda and stuff like that. He's using 2 different mics for overheads, and that song's still on the radio and sold a bazillion copies. The whole tape measure thing, I'm not that guy.
Do you worry about like snare in the center or anything, or just go for it?
I just go for it. I mean, I'm listening obviously, but if the snare is a little bit to the left when the drummer's playing, then why move it to the center? You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a little to the left. If the guy's got 2 kick drums and the snare's in the middle, yeah, you know, you definitely need to look at the big picture, but there is no hard and fast rule to me. It's not like brain surgery. This is this mic sounds good and this mic doesn't sound good, or this cymbal doesn't sound good. And it comes down to the cymbal's decaying, or you're hearing some splatter come back into the microphone. What's the sound of the leakage? That's the biggest problem I think most people never listen to. They listen to the sound of the instrument in the microphone, but you never listen to the sound of the leakage in that microphone. We spend a lot more time moving the mic around to minimize the leakage, or at least make the leakage sound good. So it's part of your drum kit, as opposed to, you know, I'm nothing against Chinese mics. One of the things we do in our class here is my partner Chad comes in with these 2 crappy little MXL mics, and you know, they're $99 or something, and I'm using an $1,800 mic, and we put them up and we listen to them, and in the track you're hard pressed to say, okay, these mics don't sound like $1,700 shittier. These mics sound fine. It just comes down to the person placing those mics, and it's fine. So there is no price tag for me. It just comes down to placement. And you know, if you've got a drummer that's beating stuff, then moving them away, or using a different kind of mic, or miking from the front, there's a lot more fixing happens before you're mixing it or recording it. That's when you should be moving stuff.
Awesome. Anything in the mix that you're doing to kind of control those things, or
anything?
Mostly just staring your teeth out.
Well, for me, I'm mixing through an SSL, so there's always a little bit of channel compression, and it's minimal. I don't compress on the way in except for the kick and the snare in the rooms. I'm not compressing the hi-hat of the ride or the overheads of the toms. If I'm looking for a specific sound, like Super Unknown, Fell on Black Days, or something like that, then yes, I might put up a microphone or a pair of microphones and squeeze it and say this is the new overhead sound. But some parallel compression when I'm mixing, EQ. I also spent a lot of time getting the phase relationship right between the drums, and if I didn't record it, then I'm not sliding stuff around all over the place. It really comes down to, you know, 0 or 180 phase switch, and then also panning is very important. A lot of times I'll get stuff in from people send me that the rack tom is panned to the left, but the rack tom and the overheads is on the right. So just realizing those kinds of things and just shifting that automatically fattens your drum sound without having to start EQing and doing stupid stuff. So
cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. You got it.
Hi, Joe. I'm Diana Inez. I'm a singer-songwriter. Thank you so much for being here. This is an awesome chat. I was just wondering, I know that you moved out to LA after school, and I was wondering how long it took for you to find your style as a producer, and if you had any challenges staying true to yourself along the way, and if you did, how you dealt with them.
When I first moved out here, I wanted to be an assistant engineer, and no one would hire me as an assistant. So I started repairing guitars at night and working at a studio doing maintenance because I could fix stuff, or I thought I could fix stuff. So then at some point, I really became hungry and wanted to learn different consoles and in different studios. So I kind of freelance assisted. So I would say learning stuff and meeting people and working my way into engineering was probably maybe a good 5 years of assisting in multiple studios before one day the band and the engineer got in an argument, engineer quit, and I was put in the hot seat. So, and then there was, you know, Garth Richardson was a big help as well, because he would do demos. I mean, it was really easy when a guy who would, you know, work at a studio would book some time and get some free time to do some demos, and nobody made any money. He's like, hey, do you want to come help? I'm like, sure. So to find my production style, I don't know if I've ever found my production style. I think it's just a portrayal of who I am. I'm kind of crazy, I guess, but staying true to yourself is one of these things where you have to, I mean, you do what you have to do to survive. But I've found that I've done stuff for money like 3 times in my life. And every time I've done it, I've either gotten a car accident, I've gotten sued, or some crazy thing. So money is not really the driving factor if it came down to.
Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
Joe, who are some of the I read where you said you assisted several different types, let's say different styles, different people, so that you wouldn't get boxed in. These different styles, what, like what?
Well, I worked in like basically 3 or 4 different studios. So I'd work at Sound City for a while, and then I wanted to learn how to use an SSL, so I took a class at USC that was like a 2-day kind of hands-on. Here's a book, and we're going to go through every button and channel on an SSL. And then I started working at that guy's studio. It was called Sound Chamber, and it was mostly soundtrack music, and we were doing stuff with Mark Isham and David Torn, and guys like that. And then I worked at a tiny little studio in a house in Woodland Hills, and that was a little more DIY kind of stuff. And they had a sister studio, so it was kind of a little bit of everything, but it was mostly in the, a good friend of mine does a lot of R&B stuff, and he's a rock dude, but he worked at an R&B studio, and he's always like, man, I really want to do rock. And I'm like, well, then just leave the R&B studio. There's nothing wrong with that. You just kind of have to focus on what you like. But at some point, it's nice to branch outside as well. I mean, I wouldn't say, I mean, David Kahne was one of those guys that worked on records that I've never even thought about doing. And he's so musical, so I don't really engineer for a lot of people, but when he calls, I'll usually do it because he thinks outside. He thinks like a composer. He's not really thinking about 1K. He's thinking about how the overall picture has mid-range or top end or bottom end. So, and he's also not just a Pro Tools guy. He likes, we started in Logic at one point. We went to Nuendo or Cubase, and it's a learning experience for me. So I don't really have a criteria. If I like the music, I like the music. I've worked on a jazzier songwriter down to a singer-songwriter, more folkier, to full-on extreme metal, obviously. But if the song is good, or if I can bring something to the table, or if I like the person, then I'm willing to do whatever, as long as I can learn from it or at least bring something to it.
Okay, I'm going to do some research on David Kahne. I've seen his name come up several times.
He did Lime, and he did Sugar Ray. He made a lot of those big radio hits, but he was doing stuff like he was having whistling at the end, like sitting on the dock of the bay kind of thing. He was doing different stuff and very musical. He wrote a ballet, and I think McCartney was in the audience and loved the music and hired him to do a record, stuff like that.
Wow. What about Michael Beinhorn? I think that's how you say his name.
Yeah, Michael Beinhorn. I worked on Social Distortion with him at Barresi a long time ago. And then after that, I worked on a whole record. I had Paul Northfield tracking guitars at Conway, and I was doing vocals with Courtney at the record plant, and then some backing vocals.
When you're working with these people, are you actually there, like say working with Michael, are you actually there with him, or are you off with the group and he's somewhere else and you're actually doing work with the group?
When it came to doing vocals with Courtney Love, he was there. But when it came to doing backing vocals with Melissa or Eric or anybody else, he wasn't around. So it depends.
Is there anything you picked up from him?
Yeah, I mean, he's a super nice dude to hang out with, and he has a idea of what it should sound like in his head, and he'll make you go through whatever it takes to get to that point. And a lot of times, I remember reading an article on Roy Thomas Baker who talked about going to the extreme, so at least you know what the extreme is, and then start subtracting. So that's how I think of Michael Beinhorn. He'll go full circle, and then he'll say, you know what, man, we were good at halfway, but you didn't know you were great at halfway until you went all the way and realized, okay, all the way sucks, so let me just peel it back. So there are a lot of guys that'll just go a quarter of the way and say that's good enough and I'll fix it, but not guys like Michael Beinhorn or Roy Thomas Baker or dudes like that.
Okay, we've got some guys posting on Facebook right now. One of the guys is Jake Antelis. He says, thank you for all you do, Joe. You're an inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
He's watching right now. Let's see. Joe Orozco and his wife, they would like to know, what was the music that influences you the most when you were growing up? What was the music that influenced you the most? And who are your influences, when you were a teenager? So basically the same question.
Basically, everybody starts out with the Beatles and the Stones, I think. So my brother was a Beatles fan, so I was a Stones fan. But you listen to the Beatles records, and they're pretty much an education in pretty much everything music. Then later on, I was really into math and music at the same time, and I started reading about Tom Scholz, who was in Boston, and that was a very big influence because he was actually doing some crazy stuff where I was inspired actually to go to school because of him. He was going to MIT, designed the Polaroid one-step camera. He figured out a way to analyze his guitar sound so he can come back to it 6 months from now and get the exact same sound by looking at an RTA basically and taking a snapshot in time. And the fact that he played guitar and bass and keyboards and everything was pretty inspirational. So I'd say Boston was, one of those bands where you just 16 million records later, it got pummeled into your head. And Zeppelin, John Bonham is still the greatest drummer in my opinion in the world. There's so many, and then I like extreme music too. I got into black metal, and I like the fact that maybe it doesn't sonically sound like a Barbra Streisand record, but it sounds like something. So, conviction when you make music is important. I think you connect with it, and it can be anything. A good song is a good song to me. I don't care who wrote it or what kind of genre it's in.
Okay. And Tom Leach has a question for you. It is, how do you approach working with an artist like Queens of the Stone Age or Tool when the content and vibe of the tracks might differ so much from track to track and you have so many people's input? And who's your favorite current artist?
Well, I'll give you an example. The first Queens of the Stone Age record was just forging ahead. It was two guys, Josh and Alfredo. So that sound was just becoming, we were trying to make the sound. And it wasn't a planned out sound. Something like Lullabies to Paralyze, that was a specific, every song is going to take on its own identity and we're going to track it live. So we spent a lot of time getting the sound for the song right. And we might have cut the same song 3 or 4 times in 3 different ways. So in that particular case, that's a different thing. I don't remember the last question, sorry. Like Tool, we track live, but that was a lot of rehearsal going on. So those songs were pretty much ironed out. There wasn't a whole lot of changing for me other than this felt good in rehearsal at this tempo. So maybe let's try it here, but there's no click track in a band like that. They just play.
Okay, and who's your favorite artist? Who are you listening to right now?
Right now, it's in my CD player right now in my car. I've got Foghat, which I love because if you listen to 70s records, it's inspirational when it comes down to effects because there wasn't anything. You couldn't pull up 100 different plugins. What did you have? You had a plate, a reverb chamber, you had a trash can, you had some slap. And some of the way, like Steve Miller and Foghat, I'm listening to the new Suicide Silence. I just finished mixing and we just got it mastered. So I'm listening to the album sequence as it goes and making sure all the vocal levels are cool. Mogwai, that's one of my favorite bands. What else is in my car right now? A band called New Model Army. I did 2 records with them and they just did a new record without me. And they sent me the record, and I've been listening to that. I'm enjoying that record. I think that's it in my car right now.
And
actually, I just bought a band called Camel.
Camel?
It's a 70s band, but everything is sort of where Mogwai, I think, originated from. It's very trippy and ambient and kind of cool and weird.
Cool and weird. Reading. In the past, you were saying that you read a lot. Are you still reading? And if so, what are you reading these days?
I just, yesterday, I got a book on, it's a new Thomas Dolby book. And I haven't started yet. It came in from Amazon yesterday. Right before that, there's a guy named Victor Wooten. I might actually have the book here. He's got a book called The Music Lesson, which I highly recommend. It's a spiritual guide to music, and it's super well written. He's an insane bass player. I've never met him, but if I ever do meet him at NAMM or something, I'd probably just go up and say, hey, I bought like 20 copies of your book and give it to all my friends. He's the way he explains his theories on music in this super spiritual way is really, really cool, and it's a very easy read. I'm always reading magazines. I've got another, you read something and I just bought a book that was insanely expensive, and it's almost like an encyclopedia of audio, just how to build a recording studio. It's like that thick, 500 or 600 pages, and stuff like that puts you to sleep. But you can get a chapter in here and there, and it's, you learn whatever. I mean, if you learn about anything, sound transmission, it's a cool thing to me. So, and then there's other non-music related stuff too.
You're muted, JD.
Oh yeah, can you hear me?
I got you now.
Cool. Hey Joe, I'm JD. I'm here based in Melbourne, Australia at the moment, and had a question regarding working with new musicians. Now, of course, it might be a different thing where you have more experience, you have a status in the industry, and when musicians go in with you, they know they are serious musicians. But
really.
How do you deal with musicians who are, well, how do you discipline them if they kind of take your time for granted, they're not performing well, or if they come to the studio, they're like, we have a budget for these many days and we'll do our best, but they're not really performing that well. The vocalist has not practiced well. He's not able to get the notes you want him to get, or he's not really cut out for the job. How do you deal with musicians then?
Well, I mean, ultimately your name goes on it. So you have to make that decision whether or not you're going to finish. First of all, if it was something that you really liked, you might have seen them play already. So maybe you go down to the rehearsal room and you make sure they're ready before they come into your studio, because they have X amount of dollars and it's very limited and your time is expensive, or at least important. There are times when bands can't, might be not the right time or the right mood. So it's not a problem to go elsewhere and do something else, and this song is a super dark song. Well, singing it at noon is probably not a great idea. Maybe that's why you can't perform it. So let's do something else today. So planning around that. I mean, there's no way you can actually ever tell what it's going to be like, especially if they come from out of town. I had an experience with an Australian band that came to America to do a record, and I thought the demos were great. And then when they got here, I figured it was all Pro Tool because it wasn't very great, but I couldn't really kick them back out of the country. So you make do what you do, and you try to inspire. And the one thing I realized is the sum of the parts is really the important thing. Not everyone needs to be a great musician, because sometimes the great musicians is just kind of boring. It's like a band like L7 to me is it wasn't, not everyone was perfect at what they do, but when you put four together, it's a perfect sounding band with an identity. So, the sum of the parts is really the important thing, and realizing that and capturing that and playing to that strength. I think the more you work with a band, with people in general, I mean, as stupid as this is, like, you go to the library or buy a psychology book, because dealing with people is really most of this job. It's not really, anybody can put a microphone in front of a kick drum and go, hey, it's a kick drum. But getting the drummer to play the kick drum like this is the kick drum of all time is more psychological than engineering. So, I mean, you have to value your own time first too, before somebody else can, you have to be strict. Hey man, don't waste my time. This is not going to happen. So, and ultimately your name goes on it. So if you realize at some point you're not happy with it, I've got no problem saying take my name off it, or I'm not the right guy, or see you later, here's all your money back. Because in the end, your career is built out of your resume or discography. And if you've got 10 things on your resume that you're not proud of, what good is that? Hey, check out this band that I just did that sucks. You know what I mean? So that's all I can really tell you. Integrity.
Cool. I started off as a sound engineer, and I got a lot of credits. I worked with pop, I worked with metal, rock, and then through those contacts, I transitioned into video production. I have a large video production company I own, and for me, it was sort of like, I wasn't exactly seeing that much potential in sound engineering as a young engineer. I had the money coming in, everything was great, but I didn't see like 10 years down the line me being able to afford buying a house outright or being able to afford my own studio space. So I transitioned into video, and of course that really worked out well for me. So for a young engineer who's starting off right now, do you think there's any potential of really making it big, considering there's so much competition, especially like I'm in Australia where the market is much smaller, and according to me, the sound engineering market here died in about 2010. All musicians started going to America. Bands here didn't have that much money. So what do you think is the future? You think someone who started right now, 10 years down the line, can they go ahead and make it their dream job, or they might have to transition into something different?
Anybody can make it. It just takes a lot of luck and skill and also timing. So it didn't matter if the beauty of the internet is you can live in Australia and I can live here, and you could work on something and I can work on something. It doesn't really matter. It just, I guess you have to really just look at what you do personally. Like if you have $1 million house, you're going to need to come up with property taxes. Then maybe doing a record for $5,000 isn't really lucrative. But if your overhead is low and you enjoy what you do, and you've got a stream of whether you're doing ads for a local TV station or a voiceover and a band, you kind of just keep the hunger going. So making it big, what is making it big? I mean, there are guys that have houses 50 million times bigger than mine, but I come home and to my dog or whatever, and I'm like, oh, cool, I worked on some cool shit today. So making it big it doesn't really translate to the amount of money you have in the bank to me. It's just, you know, punk rock records to me, I'll see more of a return on a super fast, cheap punk record, because when you do a record for $5 and it sells 5 copies at $1, you've already recouped it. You know what I mean? So you spend a year making a record in Australia and no one buys it, yeah, that's a problem. You spend a week doing a record and no one buys it, you wasted a week of your life, maybe you learned something. It doesn't really, I think you got to figure out what your overhead is, really, it comes down to, and and you find something you like. I mean, I turned down $36,000 to do some rock in Espanol gig, to go out to the desert and make no money and work on the first Queens record, just because I liked the music. And then at some point, somebody else liked the music and connected with it. And then it became Queens of Stone Age, as opposed to, $36,000 in my bank account, which was more money than a year at that point in my life.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Next.
The only question I had was, which on the Pinkerton album, did you just engineer that album?
Yeah, I engineered the band. They had a deal with the A&R guy. If they sold 1 million copies, or 500 if they went gold, that they could produce the next record. So basically, they were allowed to produce the next record. Only it's a very complicated story, but we cut it in New York, and I would say I cut most of the record, and then came back. We were doing it in between Rivers' going to Harvard at the time, so I'd go to Boston and Fort Apache, and we'd work for a couple of weeks, and then he'd go back to class, and then 3 months later, or whatever, next spring break, work some more. And then at some point, I moved on to an L7 record, and Dave Fridman, who did the Flaming Lips, came to LA and set up at Sound City, and I was working in the B room, and he was with Weezer in the A room. And then he finished the 4 songs he worked on, and then probably over the next 2 or 3 weeks, they did an overdub here and there with a bunch of other guys. There's probably about 10 guys listed as engineers on there, but I'd say 70% of it was myself, and 20 of it was Dave, and then the rest of those guys.
Do you still have that console from that? I forgot what YouTube video. It was like a studio tour of your studio, and you were showing the little console that I think somebody was going to take home from like a home studio thing, and they didn't want it, and you kept it. It had like all the Neve mic pre's in it.
I've got a little Neve, and I've got a Sphere, a small Sphere as well. Sphere is very 70s, and it's very aggressive sounding.
Do you think? Oh, I'm sorry. Continue. I'm sorry.
Just a lot of distortion in the mic pre, so it's kind of aggressive sounding.
And do you think working in a major studio that have multiple rooms with different projects going on at the same time create a lot more opportunities than freelance?
I mean, I can tell you a million times you have that feeling of camaraderie and inspiration, and also competition when you hear something coming out of another room and you're like, fuck, man, that sounds killer. What's going on in there? Or you meet somebody in a lounge, or passing someone in a hallway, or you're like, hey, man, will you play guitar on our record, or can I borrow a guitar pedal? Or, that like working, I have my own studio, and maybe it's pretty elaborate, my setup, but I still don't see many people unless people come by. So where do I get inspired from? It's very hard to I don't run across anybody here except my dog, and she's not like really telling me, maybe she sometimes tells me my mix sucks or something because she doesn't wag her tail, but you don't run across people. So that inspiration, getting in a multiple room facility, or making yourself known, hanging out in groups like this, and having, have a local hanging, with all your friends, and bring guitar techs in, bring drum techs in, bring composers, whoever that's got anything to do with any kind of music, you'll learn from. So it's just important to keep that going.
Okay, I think whoever's up next.
Francisco, go ahead.
I got you. So as an engineer and working with different people, I know you started your whole company, but based on all the shitty assistance that you would get. So what's the biggest pet peeves that you found when it comes to those assistants and what people aren't learning in schools?
I mean, first of all, it was always seen, not heard. You know what I mean? That was the rule that we were taught. Your job was to pay attention. I can tell you an example where I'm tracking the drummer from Weezer's side project at a studio, and he's playing drums and his headphone falls off in the middle of a take. Okay, do we stop? All right, well, if the assistant was on the ball and he was noticing that, he might go out there and put the headphones back on so we could finish the take. Or if somebody said, man, I'm a little bit hoarse, or coughed, you might say, oh, that guy's coughing, maybe he needs a drink. So, okay, let me go get a water and have a water handy and ready. It's instead of sitting in the corner reading the newspaper or on your iPhone. And that's what I see as an assistants in studios. There's nobody paying attention to what's going on because there's too much other activity elsewhere in their phone or their whatever, And for me, if you're going to get paid $1 or $1 million, I always do the same job. It's 100%. You hire me to work on your record and I say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you 100% if you're paying me $1 or $1 million. So that's the people that want to surround yourself with. I mean, guys that can read your mind. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, maybe the next time this mic isn't sounding really good on you, but maybe we're going to try something a little different. And then we take a 2-second break, and the next thing I know, my assistant has a different mic set up for me, ready to go. That's a guy who's a winner in my book. But if I have to say, hey man, put a mic up, then I will say that, but I shouldn't have to say that if you're paying attention.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you.
MT, your turn.
Awesome. Hey, Joe, thanks for doing this.
You're welcome.
I have a question about Limp Bizkit, the Chocolate Starfish album. What was your role in that album?
My role was 3 days. Day 1, do vocals. Fred didn't show up, so me, Lethal, and the Neptunes destroyed some shit on turntables, made some cool stuff. Day 2, Fred didn't show up, destroyed some shit again. Sounded cool. Day 3, Fred showed up, tried to sing, and this is the funniest story ever. So the song is like 5 minutes long, and maybe there's vocals for the first minute, and then there's a huge interlude with no vocals, and then there's more vocals. So as he's singing, my thoughts were, okay, do I let it play through and then have him sing? And then is he going to yell at me because I let it play for 3 minutes when I should have just fast forwarded to the next section? Or if I fast forwarded to the next section, is he going to yell at me for not playing it through? So basically, knowing singers, I just thought this dude does not want to sit here since he hasn't shown up for 2 days anyway. And listen to this song go down for 5 more minutes before he has to sing again. So I just stopped, fast forwarded, and punched it in, and he lost his shit. So basically, we parted ways instantly at that point.
Gotcha. Now, my next question is building off of Jesse's earlier about the intros to the songs. Now, how much weight do you give the introduction to a song, say, versus the chorus, which we all know is extremely important? But
well, if you don't get to the chorus because you're so bored because the intro sucks, then for me, if I'm, you know, the ADD world that we live in today, if something doesn't change every 8 bars, then something needs to be introduced. So, you know, I put a CD in my car and I sit there and I'm listening. And if I'm not excited about the way something sounds, I'm never going to hear the chorus. So that, you know, the intro is the first thing you hear. So spend some time on the intro. Obviously, you're going to sing the chorus, so you want to spend a little more time on the vocal melody or the actual melody. But, you know, if the intro is long and boring, this is not the 70s anymore. Although you do get bands that sound like the 70s, in which case the intro is, here's your market, an elaborate, crazy intro.
So if you have more of a production role with an artist and you're trying to build that intro, are you creating some type of signature motif from the song to include in that intro, or how do you go about writing?
It's just sometimes it's just paying attention to what's going on. You know, I mean, knowing that. I wish there was a specific example, but I really can't give you one. But just knowing, okay, maybe we're going to use percussion on this, and maybe while you're doing percussion on something, something else happens, and maybe the ending of a song becomes the intro of the next song. Sometimes you just have I have a marxophone sitting over here on a speaker and somebody sits there and plays the marxophone and that becomes the intro of a Chevelle song. You know, there's no real thought to it I'm not like really sit down and go, okay, we're going to write an intro. It just comes down to, oh, that was kind of cool what you just did there. Let's elaborate. Or, you know, we got a piece of gear, plug it in, it turns into something different. Spin the dial on a harmonizer, plug in a guitar pedal, sometimes just feedback or whatever becomes an intro.
Interesting. So this is about mixing. At what point do you start to use automation in your mixes? Is it from the very beginning? Are you a faders down kind of guy?
Turn the faders down 2 or 3 times sometimes. Automation to me is, especially nowadays, it's sort of the last few hours of a mix, because that's where you're really getting into the emotional part of it and doing the rides and moving the snares and the kicks and riding the vocal around the guitars and things like that. But a lot of it is just kind of balancing and getting stuff to feel right together, and then knowing in my mind, okay, I'm going to need to, especially, I mean, in my younger day where I only had a tape machine and my track share, so you'd have to get into automation right away because you couldn't push up a bass fader that had, you know, when the bass didn't play, there was a tambourine. So you'd have to mult it off, and all of a sudden you'd have to turn stuff off and on, and you needed to get into automation right away. But now you just mult it off in Pro Tools. So now I can turn the bass on and off and turn the tambourine on and off and put out 2 outputs. So I don't really need to automate as far as consoles go. So yeah, I'll spend a lot of time balancing static first, and then the last few hours is really getting in there.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks for doing this.
Gavin, you had a question?
Yeah. When you was recording Maynard's vocals, do you remember what you used on them? And then also, when you recorded Slipknot, how do you record screaming vocals and keep all that energy without it clipping the mic?
Maynard, he was really fond of a microphone called the Sound Deluxe U95, I think it was. But it's a tube mic, but he was really into hand holding. So I wrapped the tube mic up in foam and he performed just like he would use a 57 or a 58. He was using an actual tube mic wrapped in foam. And then we did experimental stuff with, you know, PZMs on the wall, and he'd walk around the room, or I had him singing to a snare drum. So I got some resonance to make the sound different. We did some other weird shit too.
Wait. Was the mic still on the snare? Wait, like, I'm so confused right now.
Like, just if you're ever talking to a snare drum, take a head off a snare drum or whatever, a trash can, you can hear all the resonance. You know, I mean, if you put your head like this, it sounds totally different. So, you know, this could be a megaphone. It's to be another megaphone.
And like blend it and then blend it in with the other whatever else you track.
Or maybe it's the only vocal. You know, I had a PZM on the wall and had him sing into the wall to a PZM mic. Or 2 PZMs out in the room and had him going back and forth while he was, you know, using his megaphone and saying stuff. Guitar pickups, you know, plug your guitar into an amp and then leave the guitar on and then sing into the guitar pickup. All kinds of this crazy shit. So, and to make stuff not clear, I didn't record something, I just mixed it, but usually I'll use a SM7, greatest vocal mic, $400 and under. Can't blow it up. Dynamic mic won't blow up. Condenser mic, more detail, probably going to blow up. Tube mic, definitely going to blow up or something like that. So that's what I was.
You around for was it Wait and Bleed? Was Slipknot recorded Wait and Bleed?
Or
you?
No, I mixed it.
Oh, you mixed Wait and Bleed?
Wait, I'm not sure what you said there. Were you talking about Slipknot live in Wembley?
Yeah, I know I was back and forth, but now I asked, was you a part of Slipknot's Wait and Bleed? Because that's the only record I remember by Slipknot.
No, I just mixed the last one. It's called.
Okay, got you. But yeah, I think that's all I had.
All right, Bill.
Hey, Joe, I was wondering, as far as with guitars, if you're boosting, let's say at 100, is there a particular relationship you're looking for between the guitars on the sides and the bass and the kick in the middle, or is it just however it sounds right to you? Are you looking for something to interact between all those elements, or is it just whatever feels right?
Whatever feels right. For me, EQ is you know, I mean, I started to learn frequencies because you say, okay, this guy's chugging on an A, so an A is some conglomeration of 440, maybe 220, maybe 110 or whatever. But in the end, it kind of fluctuates. So I mean, whatever makes the part come out, the part, you know, EQ, so stuff feels good. So I don't ever really think about it if it's you know, is it the bass sounds good, the guitar sounds good, now do they sound good together? Or maybe I need to carve a little out of one, or maybe it's just panning. Before you EQ, it really comes down to phase and panning anyway first. You move something to the left, you got a guitar chunking like this, and you got a floor tom playing the same kind of Green Day-ish pattern, and put the guitar on the other side. Now all of a sudden you don't have to EQ that guitar to compete with the drums anymore.
And how about parallels? Are you using parallel processing as far as compression or distortion?
Not on guitars. I use parallel distortion on guitars. I use the pair of mic crews. But drums, parallel compression, bass, little parallel compression, hardly any parallel on the vocal. I'll just change the insert vocal. So depending on the color of the vocal, I use a different compressor on the vocal insert.
Cool. And last question, you're saying using SSL compression, using fast attack or regular?
For the most part, I try to stay out of trouble. So you can't go wrong with a slow attack and a fast release 90% of the time. And then for me, it's never about like 4 dB or 3 dB. It's usually the threshold is always you're in the compressor at all times, but the ratio is so small that I'm using the compressor for the sound. You might use the compressor for control at some point. That's a different compressor. But on the SSL, I like just a super small ratio, just to touch it. Because touching it just brings it up a little bit on the console. Just makes it come forward a little bit, and that's it. It's not really about controlling it. It's just giving it a sound.
So not even to where it's lighting the first light? You're saying it's less than that, less than 3 decibels?
Sometimes, yeah, it's not 3 dB, definitely not. Just minimal compression. If you're looking to control it, then you have to look for some other stuff. But for the most part, slow attack won't get you in trouble. You know, it depends on what it is. Everything changes. That's the beauty of music. It all changes every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can go from spiky to round. So
cool, appreciate it.
Hey, during the Sound City days.
I got time for one more, guys. I'm sorry.
All right, hold on, Gavin. Jammin' Drew has just texted. He was asking, what's your favorite compressor for in your face, but at the same time having a vocal sound be transparent, and your favorite tool for distorting a final mix, if you actually distort the whole mix.
I distort a whole mix through a Studer A to D converter. It's got tubes in it, but it could be anything. You can put parallel sans amp on the mix. It doesn't matter. The concept is there. Just parallel distortion, though, seems to work. I mean, a friend of mine does front of house for ZZ Top, and he said he's using Vitamin as a parallel distortion, the Waves plugin. So, you know, anything kind of works. My favorite in-your-face compressor for a vocal right now is a Summit TLA 100. You can get it to be really upfront. It's cool, and it sounds good. It's a tube compressor.
Okay, now everybody, the website is prosoundworkshop.com, and if you go to the schedules section, there's you'll see it all there. I see December 3rd and 4th, PSW 6, huh?
Yeah, that's a mix workshop, and then the one after is advanced mixing.
That one has a max of 10 students. Then the December 5th and 6th, the PSW 7 is the advanced mixing workshop, and that one's a max of 4 students.
Yeah.
And it's there's a prerequisite says for PSW 7, and it says PSW 6 is a prerequisite to take PSW 7.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, it really comes down. There's a lot of theory and stuff going on, a lot of listening going on. And to get into the advanced one, you really need to understand where we're coming from before it. So the regular.
You say there's a lot of listening, Joe. You know, it was a huge change for me actually hearing shit. Like I would hear transients jab my ear and make them stop. And it'd be like, say an instrument would come in and I could hear the movement and hear the transients attacking me. I'd make them stop, and the vocal was all of a sudden, the kick, snare, and vocal all of a sudden were jumping out at me just because I stopped that shit and I actually heard it. I started hearing things instead of just making moves. And, oh, I got to compress. I started actually hearing shit, and it was just a world of a difference.
You know, you don't really need your hand is the human compressor. So you don't really need to own or buy anything. It's just balance. That's the one thing I will say Chris Lord-Alge is really good at. He just a balance. And not the one thing, but you know what I'm saying. People go, I need the Waves plugins. Well, really, yeah, they're great, but you don't need anything to make anything work. You ride a vocal when you're tracking it. That's what we used to do. You didn't need to buy a reamp. You used to put it through a compressor and put it on 1-to-1, turn the gain down. In a DAW, turn your fader down. There's your reamp. You just turned it down. So yes, you can get technical, and they do sound better once you get technical, once you match impedances and stuff. But there is no. That's what I love about 70s records. There was nothing. There wasn't a million different reverb plugins. You had a plate and a chamber, and there you go. What are you gonna do with that?
All right, everybody. Thank you, Joe. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. It was a lot of fun. I'm sorry it was so short, but I do have to get to work at some point.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Joe.
Appreciate it.
Got it.
All right, y'all. Later, guys.
All right, take care.